Hello, everyone, and welcome to Women of Grace. I'm Janet Benkovic.
We are women of grace round the throne of the Lord Most High. And we lift up our praise from the depths of our souls here at Christ.
According to our guest, anti-Catholic secularism and liberalism are decimating our church, our culture, and society in general. And in his book, he tackles the issue head-on, reaching the conclusion that restoration is possible if and only if the Christian family is restored by building a new Christian patriarchy. Let's welcome Dr. Gregory Charles Dilsaver, author of The Three Marks of Manhood, How to Be Priest, Prophet, and King of Your Family. It's so good to have you here with us, Dr. Dilsaver. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you. It's my honor.
I think it's important to talk for a moment about the disease, or the plague, as you call it, that you identify in your book, which is this anti-Catholic secularism and liberalism. Define those terms for us, and what do you mean in referencing them as anti-Catholic?
Mm-hmm. Well, really, if you look at our Western culture, of course, it has the roots in Catholicism. Catholicism has been the agent that really caused its creation. And therefore, in the rejection of Catholicism, we now have a heathenistic society that is not just the pagan culture of the past that was really receptive to the gospel 2,000 years ago. But now we have a culture that is actually built up in immunity to the gospel because it's based on the rejection of that gospel. So in short, it's an anti-Christic culture. And it's going to attack first, it's going to be antithetical to the church, and then secondly to the family. So we have a very, very hostile environment, and more hostile than ever in the history of the world. And we can see that by the statistics. There's been a great apostasy in the church. There's been and the decimation of the family, of course, is just beyond anything that's happened in the past.
You begin to talk about this plague. You point out the statistics, and you begin to unpack the notion of how it actually should be based on a Christian patriarchy.
Well, you did mention that when you read the book, you were excited, and that does usually evoke emotions one way or the other.
Yes. Well, mine was a positive response.
So, I work a lot with, as a clinical psychologist, work with marital therapy and couples. And when I explain these principles and we get into it and someone's open to them, the woman sees that there's a harmony in this hierarchy. And that really what this does, not only does it call on men to be men, and it also celebrates the womanhood and the charism of the feminine, which is not appreciated in our culture. So now, just to go back to one thing you mentioned about this attack on Catholicism and on the family, because the family as well, and again, as a clinical psychologist, we see the state intruding more and more in the family, and almost has a carte blanche to do so, unfortunately. But the reason for it, again, I think is because we don't have the patriarchs, the men. Now, it's easy to point the finger at the bishops, which, thank God now, and they are coming, they're rallying against this mandate. But we can see that they have not been as militant, which I really think is a masculine aspect of the faith, in that defense of that faith. And now the chickens have come home to roost. But it's really not, their patriarchy is based on the family patriarchy. They're men of our culture. They're men that are raised in our families. And so it's ultimately a question of this Christian manhood and this not defending the faith and the family, and the lack of that. Mm-hmm. So in calling men to defend the faith and the family, we're calling upon them to give their lives for that. Now for a husband, that means giving his life for his wife, for his family, being devoted to her, and that devotion, with a passion. And what woman, what wife, wouldn't desire that?
We need men to be men. Women can't be women if men are not men. And a man can't be a man if a woman is not a woman. Mm-hmm. It's that complementarity, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's that basic, distinction that God makes, in our incarnational status, gender. Mm-hmm. And we talked about men then, how they die to self. And yes, having the willingness and the ideal that I will die for my family and I will die for Christ. But again, that takes place every day. It's putting your family first, loving them more than you love yourself, loving your wife more than you love yourself, mm-hmm. loving Christ more than you love yourself.
Yeah.
And I always tell women, I say, women, if you want to, have a man that's going to be faithful and devoted to you and have a good marriage, just make sure he loves Christ more than he loves himself. Mm-hmm. Then he will always be faithful. He will always be there for you. He will give his life for you. And that's the key. And this is the constant process of this fatherhood, dying to self. And of course, that's a Christian journey in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And like you said, a woman, it would be foolhardy for her to submit to a man she doesn't trust. It makes no sense. But unfortunately in our culture, even with the dating and process, it's almost built into it to make a woman not trust a man. Mm-hmm. Because a woman gives her heart. She gives her heart to that man fully, completely. And how many times can you break that heart mm-hmm. before they don't want to give it again?
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about how that whole concept of the woman submitting to an absolutely trustworthy man who is willing to give everything for her is part and parcel of the way in which society is meant to function as a whole, and what are the benefits that begin to come from that?
Sure. Well, again, the womanly heart, it's very interesting how the maternal heart blossoms in a proper environment, in a proper culture. And if we look back to the time of our Lord's incarnation, we can see this is the fullness of time, a culture that produced the Blessed Mother. But in that culture, a woman went from her father's home into her husband's home. She always trusted. She trusted her father. She trusted her husband. She could do that. She was never brutalized by the secular. She knew that man that she was going to marry was somebody that had already been approved and had the values of her own family. So, properly speaking then, it's this need for, as opposed to this dating we have, or the courtship, and of course the parents provide the reason and the ideals. But so much today, so often today, we don't have, I deal with couples that don't have that background. And so we're trying to build this trust that is required for this hierarchy, for the harmony of hierarchy. And so what are they going to do? And oftentimes then the men themselves, of course, continue to not be trustworthy. Mm-hmm. If you want to repair this marriage, and it can be, and it can come to great reputation, but the man has to undergo a true dying to self, a radical transformation, so he becomes a new man. And then you can trust him. So no matter what it is, if it's infidelity or what have you, if that man undergoes a conversional process, then that will also call for his wife to go through one, and a new bond can be built. But it's that key is this exclusive devotion to one's wife, which is part and parcel of her submission to her husband. Mm-hmm. Exclusive devotion. So again, if you have that exclusive devotion, there's no fear in submitting.
This narcissism that we see today, and that's not good material for a young woman who's looking for the kind of man you describe.
Absolutely, that's right. It's very dire times. Western manhood has really been been decimated, and therefore Christian manhood. The extended adolescence that you refer to, it's narcissistic, it's egocentric, as is our culture, and it extends even past the 30s. It can extend all the way through one's entire life as a man. Now the idea with adolescence, at the age of adolescence, that is the time to call the young man to these values of Christian patriarchy. That young man has the same call that I do to be a man, to live out these fatherly values. And that hinges on, just like it did with St. Thomas Becket, on the cause one espouses. So as they grow into maturity and the virility waxes, and their strength and their ideals, it all has to be channeled, not toward themselves, not toward egocentric self-gratification, but toward serving a cause. And of course that cause is the faith in the family. It's a challenge for them at that young age. Mm-hmm. And so then from the beginning, they're challenged toward that. And that's what manhood means. That's what this principle called magnanimity. St. Thomas Becket held it perfectly. He was a man then, and as we say in the book, G.K. Chesterton, paraphrase, talks about him wearing the crimson and gold for the people. It's his office. He's there. He has to have authority. But underneath he wears a hair shirt. That is that self-abnegation, and yet, because he has a cause, but he's dedicated to it, and he's willing to champion it, and he gives his life to it. Now those are the kind of men that a young woman should be attracted to and desire to be the head of her family.
Mm-hmm. Let's share about that importance to live for something greater than oneself.
Right. Well, this magnanimity was greatness of spirit. And for a man, that greatness is very much tied to this cause. This is a specific masculine distinction. Women are very interpersonal. A mother is concerned about her family. That's the way it should be. But this going forth and this militancy and this cause is what a man defines himself as, beyond the interpersonal, another aspect to that masculinity. What do I espouse? What can I promulgate? What can I do? And so in our culture, and this started way back really in the 1920s, instead of having a noble cause, be it country or faith or family, it started being these causes of games and play. And that's when we had the Playboy come into be, that's F. Scott Fitzgerald's culture. Yeah. Men started living for games, for entertainment. So, for an example, today, so if after Mass you see a group of men talking passionately about something, what do you think it is?
I think it's football.
Yes, absolutely.
I get an A.
Yeah,
I get an A.
They're talking about a football game.
Yeah.
There is their passion, but this game, it's not a battle between good and evil. What it is a distraction from the battle they should be engaged on. Here we are, and as you mentioned earlier, we're within, the faith is being decimated, the family's being decimated. We're in very dark times. The battle's raging. Do we have time to talk about a football game? No. But see, men need to have a passion, and so they give themselves to these vicarious causes. But really, I don't have anything at stake. Mm-hmm. But the real battle is this battle between good and evil, between the church and the world.
Yeah, and I don't hear you saying that there ought not to be forms of recreation, outlets for pent-up energy. What I do hear you saying is that this has in some way dissipated the masculine attention and has rendered him less virile than he ought to be. This is exciting. I am so glad we're doing so many more episodes on this topic. We're going to come back tomorrow and pick up where we left off. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Dilsaver.
We are women of grace round the throne of the Lord.